Welcome to the Future You YouTube sessions. This month's guest is Giles Yeo. He is based at the University of Cambridge Institute of Metabolic Science. He has 20 years' experience studying the genetics of obesity and brain control of food intake. In addition to academia, Giles is a broadcaster presenting science documentaries for the BBC's Horizon and Trust Me, I'm a Doctor. His first book, Gene Eating: The Story of Human Appetite, was published in December 2018. Thank you, Giles, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
And you're all the way in Cambridge?
I'm all the way, miles away from where you are.
Miles away from me in London.
A 45-minute masked train ride away from you. That's right. But yeah, I'm in Cambridge.
So these days, calorie information is everywhere. It's on your food labels, on your restaurant menus, and a lot of people stick to these quite religiously. Would you say it's useful to know how many calories there are on each food item?
I think it depends how you use calories. The first question I think we want to just deal with briefly is, what is a calorie? Yes. So a calorie that we all know about is probably a kilocalorie, and is the amount of energy it takes to raise 1 liter of water 1 degree Celsius at sea level. All right, so the numbers will be different in Jupiter, but we're not in Jupiter. So that's is one degree. So that's a calorie. So it's a unit of energy. So you listen to that, you're going, well, then it has to be equal, right? So surely it doesn't matter where the calories are coming from because they're a unit of energy. But here's the subtlety of it. It is an equal unit of energy once our body has digested, metabolized, and released the energy for us to use. Okay, and that's true. Then it doesn't matter where it comes from. But not all calories from the foods we eat are similarly available. So I'm just an example I always use is if you take 100 calories of sugar. Okay, now that's pretty close to 100 calories because sugar is our base fuel. Sugar is sucrose. It takes one break and we can absorb it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, if you had 100 calories of sweet corn on the cob, okay, and then you eat it, then you looked in the loo the next day, it's clear that you haven't absorbed anywhere close to 100 calories of sweet corn. But yet, if you take sweet corn, and you desiccate it, you turn it into a cornmeal, and then you make a corn tortilla or cornbread, whatever you want to do. Suddenly, a lot more of the calories become available. So the point being that when someone says, your lunchtime, you have to have 400 calories or less. Well, 400 calories of what, right? Sugar, celery, corn on the cob or cornbread. So I think we do need to take a more nuanced view of what a calorie in a specific food is going to be. So it's all about caloric availability, even though once we extract that calorie and begin using it, it's exactly the same.
And would it affect your digestion, how your digestion absorbs it as well? Is that part of?
That's part of it, because when we actually are doing, when we are digesting and absorbing food, it takes energy, right? Because it takes energy to gain energy. And the reason there's two things that happen, and why the number of calories locked up in food is not equal to the total number of calories we can use from a given food. The first is some stuff we just cannot digest. So the sweet corn scenario is going to be fiber, insoluble fiber and cellulose. So those, they come out the other side, right? And so those calories just don't count because they're out the other side. Now, they're good for our health. They're good for our gut. They're good for our bugs in our gut. That's a separate conversation almost, but we don't use those calories. Then when the food comes in, and this is going to be more like protein, for example, okay? When we're eating protein and soluble fiber, that's this as well, it then takes more energy to pull apart protein because it's chemically more complex than it takes to pull apart fat or carbs. So those tend to be just a lot, well, they're just a lot easier to take apart chemically. They're only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, right? That is what that does make them. And so, and we use them all. Very little energy and heat is used. Protein, it's just more, it contains nitrogen as well. It's just more complicated to take apart. And so for every 100 calories of protein that you eat on average, you only ever absorb about 70 calories of protein because it takes 30 calories worth of energy to take apart and give you access to those calories actually in protein. And remember, when I say protein, I don't necessarily mean steak. A lot of people think, "Ooh, let's go eat steak." I mean protein from tofu, from lentils, from plant-based or animal-based protein have exactly the same characteristics. And so it is critical. So when we go to the supermarket or restaurant or whatever it is, and we look at the calorie count, we need to begin to understand what those calories mean, because those calories are just giving us one piece of information. Say you're eating a cake or stew or something like that, and you can say that, all right, I need to lose some weight, so I need to eat a little bit less. Okay. Normally, I would eat this amount, and this amount might be 800 calories, but I have to cut it down. So I'm going to eat 600 calories of this particular food. So within a given food, if you're going to want to say, well, I want to eat less calories of apples or pears or ice cream or something like that, well, then that's fine, because then that's giving you a number in which you're reducing. But comparing calories between foods, I don't think makes any sense whatsoever, because they're not comparable.
Sounds quite complicated, actually.
It is quite complicated, but I think it's important. And I think it's important that we get the nuance out there personally, because a lot of people, so there was a little while back, I don't know when, the government comes up with all these obesity campaigns and this and that. And there was a little while, this was probably a couple of years ago, where they were talking about what we should be feeding our kids. Okay. And they were saying that, we need, because childhood obesity is an issue, right? And so they were saying, in order to fight it, we need to make sure we limit the portion sizes of our kids' snacks to less than 100 calories. Of what? And this is the way we get back of a Mars bar, of celery, of hummus. I mean, what are you eating, right? And so I do think just saying the calorie number, while I understand what they're trying to do, I do understand that, just saying the calorie number to me makes very little sense.
Yeah, so give some examples of that. Foods that would be quite, you have same amount of calories, but would have more nutritious value.
I think a very good rule, and I'm not a rules person, okay, but what is going to be good for you and what's going to influence slowing down the rate of calories that are actually within that food and are good for you in general are foods, are making sure you eat enough protein. So in other words, if you actually look at the back of the pack, now this is not true clearly if you buy fresh food, but whatever it is you're buying, okay, look at the back of the pack and you can see how much protein is actually going to be in there. What percentage of protein? Two other things of interest: the amount of free sugars, the amount of added or free sugars. That's going to be important. We want to minimize that, or at least not eat too much of it, and the amount of fiber, and that's a critical amount. I'm not a food Nazi. Okay, so in other words, sometimes I want a chocolate bar, sometimes I want a banana. Okay, but what I think is a stupid thing to say is to people say that, well, replace the chocolate bar with the banana. Well, sometimes you want a chocolate bar, sometimes you want a banana, right? And so I think the more critical question to ask is, how can we get ourselves a better chocolate bar? Or how can we get ourselves a better frozen lasagna? Because sometimes you need a frozen lasagna because you don't have time, because you're in a rush. Sometimes you're going to have a pizza. Sometimes you're going to have that. Sometimes you're going to make something from scratch, whatever. But when you're in the position, when you're choosing something, I'd like to think that people can try and make a better decision about just taking a similar class of food. That's how I'm in a frozen pizza mood. Okay, well, can I find a frozen pizza with slightly more protein and slightly more fiber, and then go with that, rather than necessarily looking at the calorie count? Because I think that the protein and fiber amount would play a very big role in the caloric availability, but B, protein and fiber also tend to make us feel fuller because they take longer to digest, and so they're more satiating. And therefore we end up eating just a little bit less as well. So that's how I would do it. I mean, yes, people can say, well, you shouldn't be eating candy bars at all. Oh yeah, you should be eating this and that. I'm pragmatic about these things. I agree. I think we probably eat too much meat and we do eat too much sugar. Yes, I agree. But is it wrong to have a dessert sometimes? No. Is it wrong to have it? No. So I think you want to have a more nuanced view of it, where we need to eat healthier in general. But during the times when you're trying to get yourself a chocolate bar, an ice cream, a cake, can you pick a better chocolate bar, ice cream, or cake?
And so the protein will just keep you a little fuller, you said?
The protein will keep you fuller for two reasons. As I said initially, because it takes more energy to take apart, you never absorb 100 calories of protein, you only absorb 70. The other thing which happens with protein is because it travels further down the gut. So when we eat, our food to poop tube, obviously, digestion happens. It's a long damn tube. And so when we eat and the food travels down, your gut releases hormones all the way throughout the entire process to inform your brain what's going on, right? So it informs not only how many calories you're eating, the amount of food you're eating, but its macronutrient content. So in other words, it tells you fiber, it tells you carbs, fat, and proteins via the repertoire of proteins that are the repertoire of hormones that it actually releases. And proteins, because they travel further down the gut, release different sets of hormones, and our gut hormones tend to make us feel fuller. So proteins will, eating a little bit more protein, once again, I'm not saying to go mad, but eating a little bit more protein to carb. So it's all about the protein to carb ratio. If you can shift it slightly more to the protein, you will feel fuller. And if you feel fuller, you'll eat a little bit less.
You mentioned in your book that the time of day matters when you eat. But why is that important?
Because we are remembering that the life we live in today and now, with lights, foods, whenever we want, Uber Eats, whatever we want to do, this is a very, very contemporary phenomenon. Okay. Whereas for the vast majority of human evolution, we clearly were in the Serengeti, wandering around. We had no lights. And the bottom line is this: we were awake when the sun was up and asleep when the sun was down. Okay, broadly speaking. So what happens is our metabolism shifts. Okay, so at night, why are you going to have your metabolism up? You're going to be asleep. Okay, so everything kind of tunes down, whereas in the daytime, your metabolism comes up so that A, you can hunt, B, you can avoid being hunted, and just or life in general. So if you eat if there is a certain amount of food that you're going to eat during the day, okay, however many calories that you consume, there is going to be therefore a difference if you eat more of the food early in the day versus more of the food later in the day. Because you'll therefore, if you eat more of the food later in the day, then your body will store more of it because you eat it, and then there is less time of running about in the sunlight, and then you're sleeping and your metabolism goes down. So during that stage, your body then shifts the food into storage. Whereas during the day, it will tend to burn it. Now, at some point, it will equilibrate. Okay, so it's not, I don't think the fact that in modern society, dinner tends to be our biggest meal, which is true, I think, in most societies, dinner tends to be our biggest meal. I don't think that is the cause of the obesity epidemic, but I think it plays a contributory factor. And I think if you were thinking about saying, well, I need to eat less to lose weight, because that's what you've got to do, then maybe I would not be I would not be cutting down necessarily the calories from your breakfast. I might maybe try and eat smaller dinners, for example. So that's why it matters, because of our different metabolism and what we're evolved to do. Now, clearly, if you were a bat and were awake at night and asleep during the day, then that is reversed. But we are not nocturnal animals; we are diurnal animals. And that's why this is important.
Yeah. So according to the science, do high protein and low carb diets work?
Yes, I think they do in the short term, short to medium term for some people, right? And for the reasons I've talked about, because, and it's two things. It's less about the carbs, except probably for the free sugars, but more about the fact that more protein makes you feel fuller. And so you eat less, you end up eating less. Now, carbs, particularly, you have to remember that fiber is a carb. It's just that we can't get to it. Starch is a carb. We can't get to that. And sugars are carbs. So carbs actually encompass a lot of food. So I think a better way of looking at it were if you were to cut down your free sugars. Once again, I'm not sugar Nazi, but the problem with sugar is almost every calorie of it, when you eat, you use. That's the first thing. Second, it's also very, very easy to absorb. It takes almost no heat. I talked about the heat of energy. It takes almost no heat to absorb. The calorie goes in, whoop, it's used immediately. So it's very, very available. Okay, so you don't have to eat a lot of it. Now, it's slightly different in starch, but in refined starch, but it's better if you actually have carbs which have the fiber on the outside, wholemeal stuff, because then you have the carbohydrates, and then you have the starch. So I think low carb requires a more nuanced view. People think low carb means I'm going to cut out carbs entirely. I think if you're going to do that, I would try and cut down on your sugar. That's the first thing I would do, and particularly the sugar you drink, because that you don't even chew at all. You kind of drink it, and whoop, it gets absorbed. So I think, yes, low carb and higher protein diets do work. However, there is also evidence that low carb and high protein diets can link to other diseases. Now, why? Why might this be the case? A number of reasons. First, because of the mistake that a lot of people make to think that, oh, okay, so higher protein diets work, it must be meat. Okay, it must be meat. And so you end up eating too much meat, and the ad absurdum, going all the way to the extreme, is the crazy carnivore diets where you only eat meat. Okay, and the issue with that is not necessarily the protein, but all of the associated effects of the fact that there's saturated fats in it, and it actually increases your chances of bowel cancer because of any number of links. Okay, so that's the first thing. So, but I think that if you were more pragmatic and more moderate about it, to say that, well, I'm going to increase, I like my meat, but I'm only not going to eat as much of that as possible. I'm going to eat more beans and tofu as well. Then I think that will be a very healthy way of doing it. The second thing is, as people then think about low carb completely without keeping in mind having whole meal, then what that tends to do is people then end up eating less fiber. Okay, so this is why I think it's a problem. So you mix too much meat with too little fiber, then you get risks of all kinds of diseases, and that is where that link actually comes from. Whereas if you did a low carb, high protein diet with a lot of veg and actually with whole grains and high fiber carbs, with just a moderate increase in protein, I think that is a very healthy diet to have, and I think that is A, sustainable, B, is better for the planet. And I think, and it's not extreme. It's not extreme because you're still eating carbs, you're still eating meat, you're still eating veg, and I think that probably is, for lack of a better term, the best diet to be on for many people.
Yeah, sounds quite doable as well. It's not too.
But it's boring. But the problem is, it's boring, and I'm not going to make any money from selling that diet. What diet is that? The moderation diet? What's that?
You mentioned about sugars. So there's a lot of foods now that you can get which, bars that are natural sugar. Are they better than, say, the refined white sugar?
So the thing, no is the answer. Now there's so the reason is there is sugar from honey, there's sugar from agave nectar, there is the terrible white sugar, which almost people call it cocaine. It has this visual, right? The vast majority of sugar that we consume comes in the form of sucrose. The vast majority. Okay, and sucrose is a molecule of glucose and a molecule of fructose stuck together. And this pretty much is the sugar we eat wherever it comes from. Now, some sources of sugar do taste different. Now, this is a very different thing. Plain sugar is very sweet, whereas honey or agave nectar or maple syrup adds another something because it tastes different. So you use that in different recipes because it adds a different. I mean, honey is bee puke, so that's obviously going to taste different. Okay, from sugarcane sugar, from anything sugar. But the sugar in it, they're all natural sugars, are exactly the same.
Sugar is one of those things you get cravings for. If you have it in your diet, you crave it more, and if you cut it back, you seem to crave it less.
And yeah, so for sure. I mean, people misuse the word addiction. There is no such thing as sugar addiction. Mm-hmm. But what you say, so your language you've used, I think is a better use. Mm-hmm. Yes, people do crave sugar, and it is something you can wean yourself, for lack of a better, off. So in other words, if you are used to very sweet foods, you'll do it. Whereas you can actually get your taste buds and everything slightly more used to something with slightly less sugar.
And alkaline diet. I know you do speak about this in the book, and I think you covered it in the documentary that you did as well.
I did. So there are very few of the diets which we talk about that are complete BS. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of them are misused. People take it to the extreme. The alkaline diet is complete BS. And it's complete BS for a number of different reasons. What is the alkaline diet? Just briefly, I'll see it. Our blood pH, our pH is a measure of alkalinity or acidity, is 7.4. Now, 7 is neutral. If it's below 7, it is acidic. If it's above 7, it is alkaline. So mammalian blood, this is going to be true for pretty much all mammals, is around 7.4. So we're slightly alkaline when it comes to our blood. This is a fact. So the chap who came up with it and actually just got out of jail is a guy named Robert Young, and he lives in San Diego. And Dr. Robert Young, he's not really a doctor. And he came up with this whole point where, well, in order to maintain the alkalinity of our blood, we therefore need to eat alkaline foods. Okay, now this is entirely, so the first bit of entire pseudoscience about this is nothing we eat will change the pH of our blood. because we have a stomach, and our stomach is pH 1.5. Okay, it's really, really acidic. It's like it's like battery acid. Why? Because our food goes in there, it gets mixed, and then when it comes out into the small intestine, it's neutralized, so it goes back up to pH 7. But the big acid does two things. It starts the digestion process, and it triggers the enzymes it needs to begin to break down, and then it goes into the intestine for the next stage of the digestion, and everything is neutralized. Which means that whatever it is you eat, it doesn't matter if you're eating, whatever it is, will become pH 1.5 and will be neutralized. So that's the first thing. Even if you ignore the presence of the stomach, okay, let's just say the categorization of what is alkali or acidic makes absolutely no sense. I don't know if you saw, there was a big hoo-ha. My favorite website, other websites exist, Goop. Okay, the lifestyle page of Gwyneth Paltrow, and so she was there, and there was a shoot, and I forgot what fancy schmancy magazine that was, in which she was there with her alkali water, so high pH water, which she was spritzing in lemon. Now, if you just think about that, just for 3.2 milliseconds, think about it. But why? Lemons are considered by the alkali community to be alkali. Lemons, however, last time I checked, is a citrus fruit, which means that it's full of a citric acid, which is why it's called a citrus fruit. And plus, it has ascorbic acid, otherwise known as vitamin C. And so it is an acidic fruit. Why is it alkali? The other thing is meat, okay? Now, meat, what is meat full of? Meat is full of blood. Blood is alkali. So meat, by definition, is slightly alkali, but according to the alkali community, it is acidic. So sometimes they get it correct, I think, by accident rather than by design, to be fair. And so it makes absolutely no sense why you would call citrus fruits alkali. Now, why do people follow it? This is always the question to ask. Because if you actually examine, leaving aside the crazy categorization of foods, if you actually examine what an alkali diet turns out to be, it turns out almost to be a vegan diet. Okay, plant-based, because meat is acidic, you want to minimize it or leave it out entirely. Because dairy is considered acidic, you kind of leave it out. So in other words, you're cutting out meat and dairy, whereas most of the alkali foods, which is why they list lemons as alkali, are veg and fruit. And so what the alkali diet is a vegan or plant-based diet with a BS backstory. There are a lot of books out there about plant-based and vegan. And I think alkali at least has something sexy, which, it's got a different backstory, and people can actually cling to it. That's why people follow it. But actually, the alkali diet makes absolutely no sense. Don't waste your money. Don't waste your money on high pH water.
So vegan diets, then, would you recommend those?
Two things. There is a big difference between being vegetarian and being vegan. I know you guys know what the difference is. Clearly, one, you can eat dairy products and eggs, and the other, you don't. But the most important difference about the two of them is that you can be vegetarian very, very easily. Now, you may crave meat. Let's leave that alone. But you can be vegetarian very, very easily. You can do it if you're poor. You can do it if you're rich. You can do it if you're doing. Why? Because the presence of the dairy and the eggs mean that if you stick to that, you are going to end up with all of the nutrients that you're ever going to need. Okay, so this is a critical piece of information. Whereas if you go vegan or plant-based, which is a slightly more extreme of being vegan, then you have to make sure that you eat some of the things. So you got to make sure you have a full complement of the right type of protein. You got to watch your iron. Most importantly, you have to watch your vitamin B12 and iodine. Okay, now both of these you pretty much have to supplement if you're going to become vegan or plant-based. So why am I giving you all this information? I'm giving you all this information because vegetarianism, you can, in fact, I think, to be fair, for the vast majority of humankind, we probably were largely vegetarian. Why? Because chasing down an antelope was probably a pain in the backside, and you didn't always guarantee that. And why would you end up eating your cow if you could drink the milk from the cow? So every so often there was a feast, you may eat the cow. But broadly speaking, you drank the milk, you ate the eggs, you weren't going to be killing chickens random. And so largely, I think we were vegetarian. Whereas veganism is a choice. Okay, it's a first world choice. You have to be privileged enough. We are, by this very definition, you and me speaking here, we are privileged enough. I am flexitarian. Don't look at me like that, which I am. So I'm vegan probably a few times. I'm not afraid of being vegan. I can cook vegan food. I have no issues against it. But I know it's a choice that I'm making. It's a privilege that I can actually do. Whereas there are a lot of people who don't have that choice. So the iodine thing is a weird thing. So why might it be iodine? Because I didn't know this. So I did a documentary, a little short documentary thing for Trust Me, I'm a Doctor, where I went plant-based for a month. Yeah. And so we explored how you could be plant-based. And this is where I found this out, actually. The vast majority of the source of our iodine, certainly in North America and Europe and in places like Australia and Australasia and places, come from dairy products. And you might think, really? I thought it's fish. Yes, there is a lot of iodine in white fish, okay? And there is a lot of iodine in seaweed. So the Japanese have no issues with iodine, for example. But actually, the vast majority of those countries which I'm talking about, United States, Australia, and the UK, don't eat that much fish. We do eat some fish, but not a lot of fish. So actually the vast majority, and certainly not seaweed either, the vast majority of iodine comes from cows. And you're going, really? Cows are rich in iodine? Not intrinsically, but because the feed that the cows are on is high in iodine, because the cows need iodine, and it comes through the milk. And so when you stop dairy products, you in effect, unless you're a big seaweed eater, you end up with iodine deficiency. And so when you are vegan, so I think a vegan or plant-based diet can be a very, very healthy way to live if you do it correctly, if you supplement appropriately, and if you make sure you eat the right foods. But if you do that, sure. But if you are Mr. Smith, who has to work 2 jobs at minimum wage, eggs and milk are cheap. Okay, really? You're gonna tell them not to do that or feed the kids that? No, please. So that is the nuance. That is the nuance. I think done correctly is a perfectly healthy choice to live.
Yeah. Is there a good weight to lose per week when you're on a diet?
For you as an individual, how much weight you need to lose depends on how ill you are. And so therefore, now if it's me and maybe I want to lose a couple pounds, maybe you can lose all the couple pounds in 1 week. Now, if you are someone who's 200 kilos and need to lose half your body weight, that's a very different conversation that we need to have about how to lose the weight, because then the longer you stay at that weight, the higher the chance of you dying of something, right? So there is a different urgency there than an urgency for me or someone that needs to lose 10 pounds. The other thing which is you need to consider is as well, how much weight do you actually need? Why are you losing the weight to begin with? And how much weight is actually unhealthy? Now that's going to be individualized, okay? Because all of us can store a different amount of fat safely. I think I write in a book about fat cells. People think that when you gain weight or lose weight, you are gaining and losing fat cells. And this is not true. You have to, the number of cells, they're like muscles, right? You don't gain or lose muscles by building muscles. Your muscle cells get bigger. And when you lose muscle mass, your muscle cells get smaller. This is the same thing to do with fat. Okay, your fat cells are like balloons, and they balloon up or they balloon down as you gain or lose weight. Okay, now the safest place to store fat is in the fat, because it's a fat storage organ. But then it's when the fat is no longer there and it goes to your muscle and it goes to your liver, that's when it begins to cause trouble. And this is the important point here. All of our fat cells can expand to differing amounts, to differing sizes, before it leaks the fat, before the fat becomes full. So they're going to be famously East Asian people, Chinese people like me, South Asian people, so Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Indians, famously cannot get as large without actually getting type 2 diabetes, for example. Whereas white people, okay, not all white people, but white people, Polynesians, okay, famously can get enormous before they actually get ill, because each of us have our different safe fat storage capacity. So obesity, people say obesity, the definition of obesity is BMI above 30. Not really. Well, that is the definition on paper. To my mind, the definition of obesity is carrying too much fat where it begins to influence your health. And that amount of fat is going to be different between you and different between me. So back to the question, how much weight is safe to lose? you have to take into account all of everything I just said, and then find what you need to do to lose the weight. I think we think a little bit too much about weight, to be fair. I think we need to think more about watching our health. And I think if we watch our health and look after our health, our weight will take care of itself.
And has the BMI average for the average male and female over sort of the decades, has that gone up over time?
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. The average BMI in 1984, okay, and that's because this is a number which I quote, in a male and a female, both roughly the same, was roughly around 22 to 23. The average male BMI in 2014, certainly in the United States, is 27. So that's the average. So that has suddenly become overweight, and so it has gone up inexorably. So we need to do something about it, right? Because as we're beginning to reach that maximum, what the scariest thing that's happening is that people are becoming obese earlier and early on in life. And while people used to talk about the middle age spread, you're now seeing teenagers who are living with obesity, little kids who are living with obesity. Now, what kills you is type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, cancers, and all kinds of things. So the younger you are becoming to be obese, the more you are then exposed to all of these risks, increasing your chances of dying younger. So that is a real issue. And all the evidence points to the fact that if you become obese as a child, it is very difficult to become unobese. Very difficult. It's not impossible, please, but it's very difficult.
What would you suggest would be helpful for an individual to do to make changes?
People say, can I take a genetic test? You can, but can I take a genetic test and then have the test tell me how I can lose the weight? Now, there are a lot of companies that claim to be able to do this, but really we're not there with it, nowhere near there with the technology yet. Okay, and it's a long story why, but we're just not. Don't waste your money. So I would do two things. The first is very depressing, very depressing. The first is to look at your folks. Now, this is a free genetic test. It's not predictive per se, but it's going to be a hell of a lot more predictive than a genetic test. Now, look at your folks. What shape are they? What diseases do they have? What diseases may they have died from? Slightly morbid, but actually not morbid at all. Okay, so then you say, okay, well, maybe I do have to take care of myself a little bit more. Okay, so that's the first thing you've got to do. You've got to understand what is ahead of you. Then how do you then control this? I think what you want to do is you need to be honest with yourself about your feeding behavior. Okay, about what your weaknesses are. Do I like chocolate or do I like chips? Do I tend to respond to stress by eating, or do I respond to stress by not eating? When I sit in front of the telly, do I tend to have a bowl of something to eat where I mindlessly kind of eat everything? So once you've then established yourself within your household, say you are a TV eater, well then try not to put something in front of the TV, and that's a load of calories just not there, right? If you respond to stress by eating, can you put something in space there, closer by, which you can do, leaving aside drugs and alcohol, please, okay? That instead of food for stress, is there something else you can do? If you really love chocolate, then maybe don't have as much chocolate within the house, because out in the wild, when you go outside, we can't do anything about that, because if you go to your supermarket, if you go to your gas station, you're going to see all these things there. But so I think control the environment you can control in your house by being honest with yourself of what your weaknesses are, and look at your parents. Just do those two things, and I think it gives you a fighting chance of putting together your own personalized strategy to try and get you to eat a little bit less.
Yeah.
The problem with obesity needs to be tackled from a personal level, in your household, understanding yourself. Then it needs to be done at the government and policy level to try and make the environment that we are living in better. And we need to tackle each at a time. I try and speak to the public, obviously. I work at a government-funded institute to tackle obesity. And so as a unit, we try and speak to policymakers to try and make sure that message is pushed out there, so that the best policies, they don't listen to us, and so that the best policies are actually being made.
Yeah, small changes.
Sadly, small changes, but sadly, I think I'll have a job for a while yet. Yeah. But I do think it's important that we do take it seriously.
Yeah.
And we do take it as a problem, and we do take it not as a personal failing, when people find it difficult,
Yeah.
but as a battle against biology. So each of our biology, individual biology, will make it more or less difficult for us to eat less or follow some of the rules. We have to understand this. Okay, that is where the genes come in. The physics means that you still need to eat less. Okay, so I'm not saying that you can magic the weight away. Mrs. Smith, who has type 2 diabetes and is large, will still need to lose weight if she doesn't want to lose her feet and her eyes. Okay, but if we understand that it is more difficult for Mrs. Smith to lose weight because of her biology, then we can put strategies and mitigate other things and put things in place so that we can help and support Mrs. Smith or Mr. Smith, pardon me, who needs to lose the weight to actually do it. So I'm not giving anyone any excuses. I'm not trying to say that people can be whatever size they want. You can be whatever size you want, but you can't be whatever health you want. I mean, that's the reality. That's the reality of it. You can be whatever size you want, but it is going to at some point influence your health. And so that is probably where I am in the space.
Yeah, treating everyone as an individual. So, thank you so much. It's been really great.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And if you're interested in learning more, I've left the link below for Giles's book.